But having open and obviously cordial, productive relationships with a country like Mexico with a growing economy
might tick off President Trump.
Well, it may.
Wow, we've got a lot of stuff here. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we've got U.S. Ambassador admitting that Trump decided to do the 35% tariffs because of how Carney and his team were treating them. It's a feeling. It was strictly a feeling and a result of bad negotiations, bad human interaction. We got Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston banning hiking. That's not a joke. Let's jump into this. Moving ahead, we got this one. Canada job vacancy rate plunges to 8-year low, worse than the world event. So you can see the years down here. This 25 is 2025. This is 2020, the world event here. And it's talking about this red line here. This is Canada. We're in an 8-year low going back to 2018, but the lowest here was 2016, and we're still headed down. CBC propaganda media will spin this as a good thing. I wouldn't be surprised if they do. Looks like Carney's charm is working. You got to check out this story coming from Nova Scotia. Fake conservative Tim Houston is banning people from going into the woods. This is draconian stuff like you'd see out of the world event time period.
A leisurely walk in the woods is no longer allowed in Nova Scotia, and it may not be for the rest of the summer.
Effective 4 p.m. today, we're telling Nova Scotians, stay out of the woods.
Nova Scotia's premier announced today a ban on activities in the forest because of extreme dry conditions and the risk of wildfires.
Hiking, camping, fishing, and the use of vehicles in the woods are not permitted. Trail systems through woods are off limits.
At these
Dude, this is the dumbest thing I've heard in my life. Tim Houston, complete idiot. You can't have people all locked up and cooped up. We already know what happens. The world event, people got really depressed. People going hiking doesn't start wildfires. You can have a simple rule that if somebody's caught lighting a fire, having a campfire, they get 25 years in jail. Make it something really insane that will force people to not want to do that. Banning people from going in the woods and going camping or backpacking does not make life better, will not stop wildfires. This is absurd. If they did this in British Columbia, I'd tell David Eby to shove it.
In trails in the heart of Sydney, some agreed with the move while others didn't.
As long as you're not starting a fire or smoking, that kind of thing, you should be able to walk there.
It kind of sucks.
Exactly. Make it so you can't smoke outside, you can't light any fires, no campfires, all that. But outright banning hiking in Nova Scotia is the dumbest thing ever.
So the campers and anybody out tenting, but it's probably necessary.
At these wooded trails in Coxeath, the entrance is blocked off. The people who run the trails say while they understand the province's move, it's also unfortunate.
So there's some expansions and upgrades that we had hoped to finish this summer that, depending on how long this goes, it will be slowed down.
According to the province, the penalty for violators will be the same as it is for the burn ban put in last week, $25,000, though camping is allowed at registered campsites and some exceptions will be made for work in the woods.
$25,000 fine if you go hiking in Nova Scotia. This is a slippery slope here. Is this just a trial run for the rest of Canada? What's next? Are they going to tell us when we can use the bathroom? Are they going to tell us when we're allowed to go to the grocery store? What the heck is this?
As for how long this ban on being in the woods might remain in place, the Premier said it could be as long as Nova Scotia's burning ban until October 15th, unless conditions change in the meantime in the form of some significant rain.
I don't know what else to say to this. Preventing people from going for a hike will not solve the forest fire problem. We should stop sending money to Uganda and Democratic Republic of Congo and buy more water bombers, not destroy people's mental health. Tim Houston is an absolute disgrace of a premier. He's almost as bad as David Eby. Next up, we got CBC here doing their best to try to help Mark Carney out. Carney failing miserably. He sent a couple of his goons down to Mexico to try to get a trade deal. He is looking awful on the world stage, considering Canada had the most negotiating power with America, considering how much trade we have with America, and him not securing a deal, him pissing off Trump, China pissing off Trump. Really, this is a bad thing for Canada. Mark Carney probably doesn't even care.
The Prime Minister has announced more than $1 billion to support Canada's beleaguered softwood lumber industry. The bulk of funding will go toward loan guarantees, with the rest for product development and diversification. Softwood lumber has long been a target of the U.S. It recently raised anti-dumping duties on the product. Prime Minister Carney says that the new measures are necessary given the state of Canada-U.S. relations.
At this hinge moment in history, Canada is starting to shift from reliance to resilience. Together, we're going to write our own story rather than let others dictate theirs to us.
Mark Carney also says the government will use Canadian lumber as part of its promise to build affordable homes. A federal home building program will launch in the fall, providing $25 billion in financing for private sector home builders.
Yeah, like who? Modular Group, Brookfield, Modular Homes, that's his plan. He already announced it. That is his plan. Carney is so conflicted. He can't be our prime minister.
Leader of the Conservative Party responded to the prime minister's announcement. Pierre Poilievre suggested that the money for softwood lumber would not be necessary if Mark Carney had kept his word.
Mark Carney promised us that he would put elbows up, that he would handle Trump, and that he would negotiate a win by ending the tariffs. He's broken all of those promises. And we know President Trump is someone that nobody can control, but that's why it was wrong for Mr. Carney to promise that he could do so.
You guys had the U.S. ambassador to Canada on the show today. There's some new insight from that about the state of trade talks. What did you learn?
Yeah, so we keep trying to get a better understanding of why Canada was the first country to get those increased tariffs. Donald Trump had set the August 1st deadline. That was Friday, of course. But it was only Canada that had the increased tariffs kick in right away. The tariffs related to border security going from 25% up to 35%. But keep in mind, there are huge exceptions to that sort of tariff right there because there are exemptions for CUSMA compliant goods. So any Canadian goods that are being shipped into the United States or sent into the United States that meet the free trade agreement requirements, they remain tariff-free.
One thing to note about CUSMA, there's a lot of paperwork involved with that. So a lot of companies, even though they could be CUSMA compliant, aren't, because it is a lot of work and paperwork and hoops to jump through. So a lot of companies now in Canada are having to try to jump through those hoops to avoid the tariffs. This whole thing has just been a disaster for our country. If we just had an honorable leader that stood up and was fighting for Canada, unlike Mark Carney, who's fighting for his stocks in America, we wouldn't be in this situation.
But because Canada did not catch a deal, but at the same time, Mexico, who is in this huge North American free trade agreement with both Canada and the United States, they were actually able to get an extension. So we put it to the U.S. ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, to sort of get a better understanding of why is it that Mexico was able to get an extension. Their tariffs did not go up, but Canada was hit. Have a listen.
It's because of the feeling in the room or the energy in the room when the negotiators are talking to each other. And, so the decision was made by our team, to the president. The president decided, let's give Mexico an extension, put the 35% tariff on Canada.
That's the first time.
He said it right there. It's all based on feeling. And that's what it is. When it comes to negotiations, it has to be a win-win. If you're pissing off the other side, you're not going to get a good deal. This is the basics of negotiation here. Clearly, either Mark Carney doesn't know the basics of negotiation or he's working with Donald Trump to tank Canada. We're going to find out one way or another here what's the real final agenda here. But Carney's doing a great job of boosting his stock value right now.
That I've heard from an American official that essentially the reason is the vibes were off, the energy in the room was off. What we have heard previously was that the Americans wanted to make an example of Canada because Canada, of course, has retaliated as a result of some of the tariffs that have been imposed earlier. So that was certainly an interesting aspect to what's going on there. But later, Ambassador Hoekstra said, listen, I'm not in the room. And he added sort of some couching there, like saying the word assumed to some of his answers. But certainly that was the first time we heard that perspective. We're waiting to find out if there are going to be any conversations between Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump. That's still unclear at this point, other than what we are hearing that the Prime Minister today is saying that they will have a conversation when the time is right.
It's so weak. They're not going to have any conversation anytime soon. I don't think we're going to get any deal in the near future. And I think when CUSMA comes up, that renegotiation will end up getting tariffs as well on that. 15%, 20%, who knows, maybe even 35% on everything traded between America and Canada. Next up, we got this story from CTV. It says the elbows up tariff retaliation backfired. Former Foreign Affairs Minister explains. Something is very fishy with this story.
Canada's trade troubles. Two senior cabinet ministers, Anita Anand and Francois-Philippe Champagne, are in Mexico right now in hopes of strengthening ties. The trip comes just days after President Trump announced that he reached a deal with Mexico to extend an existing trade agreement for another 90 days. Joining me now is Peter MacKay, former Foreign Affairs Minister.
So Anand and Champagne are down there trying to probably make some sort of deal or something just so it looks like we get a win. They're trying to get a win for Carney, but this time coming from Mexico.
So we are already trading partners under CUSMA. What more could be done to increase bilateral trade between Canada and Mexico?
Well, as it currently sits, Marcia, we do about $56 billion annually in trade with Mexico, but that's only about 1% of what Canada sends into their economy. So there are specific sectors, the tech sector, for example, certainly other agriculture products and things right now that we're not currently trading. And so having two senior ministers there to talk is always a good idea. Now, granted, these are not ministers who are directly involved with the ongoing tariff and trade dispute with the United States, but perhaps we can also learn something from their approach. They took a much more measured and perhaps low-key approach, and it seemed to work for them. As you said, they just had their tariff-free trade extended by another 90 days.
Well, that was going to be my next question for you. Mexico received this reprieve from Trump. Canada clearly did not. So why do you think Trump is approaching Mexico differently? What are they doing that Canada isn't doing?
This is quite obvious. So before he responds, Donald Trump likes to be the center of attention. When he walks into a room, he wants everyone to notice, everyone to kind of point and pay attention. He wants to be the center of attention. We have a trade tariff situation like this where he's changing America's way of dealing with the world. You can't be the one to fight back against him and retaliate and elbows up and all of that. He'll take it, and he probably did take it as a way of undermining his plan, his goals, and he probably took it personally that they're trying to humiliate him. And then when I say they, I mean Canada and China, the two countries that retaliated. Now, what doesn't make sense with this whole story and this whole situation, Mark Carney so heavily invested in America. Mark Carney has his ties with Donald Trump or Donald Trump's extended family there, the Kushner family, Brookfield, 666 Fifth Avenue, that whole saga, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of that. Mark Carney told Trump that he would be doing this elbows up approach, but he didn't mean it. And he told him that and said, hey, I'm just going to do this, but don't worry, I don't mean it. Trump knew this. We get the results of the tariffs, Canada getting one of the highest ones. Is it because of supply management? Is there something else on the table there that I think, which I think there is, there's something else that Mark Carney won't negotiate. It seems Trump now is making an example of Canada because he doesn't want to be humiliated. He wants to show that he's the big boss. Meanwhile, though, this doesn't affect Mark Carney. He's invested in America, not in Canada.
Or should be doing.
Well, as we know, Marcia, he takes a very personal approach. And I think, frankly, my opinion, the elbows up, dollar for dollar tariff retaliation, granted, all that happened during an election and it didn't work. It frankly backfired the same way that it did for China, and they're also on the outside looking in. So perhaps a little more subtlety and behind the scenes work to try to alleviate some of these other outstanding issues, some of which are simply not true around fentanyl and border problems. But nevertheless, the president
That's not necessarily true, though, because we don't know what the real numbers of the street fentanyl is. Canada is the hub. We know that Vancouver, essentially Greater Vancouver, is the world hub of manufacturing this crap and sending it around the world. The precursors come from China. They get manufactured in Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, and they get sent around the world, including Canada and America. And we don't know the real numbers. We do know that there's a bunch of super labs in our country. So can we really blame Donald Trump and the Americans for being upset that this highly toxic, lethal, horrible substance is coming from Canada, and then using data numbers like only 1%, well, only 1% we know of? This hasn't been a good argument for the Liberals, and it still isn't a good argument. Street fentanyl needs to be eradicated from our country.
Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, has effectively maneuvered around some of the difficulties that Canada and our Prime Minister Mark Carney have experienced. So there is obviously lessons to be learned.
As you point out, these are not ministers directly involved with trade, but I'm wondering if over the next 48 hours, relationships could be built that would help perhaps in a precursor to CUSMA negotiations or renegotiations.
Oh, absolutely. Building relations is always a good idea. And having said that, we really don't send as much to Mexico as we could and as we should, given our proximity. It makes far more sense when we talk about diversification, yes, to Europe, the Asia Pacific, certainly the UK. But here we are sitting on the top half of North America, Mexico on the bottom half, we have tremendous opportunity if we can get it there. Energy becomes a big question because we'd have to transit it through the United States or ship it there. And so our own infrastructure limitations, again, come into play. But having open and obviously cordial, productive relationships with a country like Mexico with a growing economy, that makes perfect sense.
Might tick off President Trump.
Well, it may. And, as we've seen in the past, he does have this mercurial personality when he thinks somebody has disrespected him or talked tough and then not backed it up. We certainly saw.
That's exactly what I just said. You can't play this game with Trump because he holds all of the power. They should have come out. I said this so many times. They should have come out with this big package with all this stuff that's beneficial to America and gets Canada a couple wins, including getting rid of the tariffs and saying, America, this is what you're going to get. It's all this stuff. And then Trump can go to the media and brag about all this stuff that he got. That's what we should have done. But once again, Mark Carney and the Liberals will not negotiate a couple key pieces which are required to make this deal happen because quite clearly they probably have friends or themselves with financial interests in these sectors like supply management. Meanwhile, Mark Carney doesn't care about the timber industry. I should note too, Brookfield used to have investments in timber and they sold them many years ago. So it's really quite clear what Brookfield has investments or not investments in is very clear on what Mark Carney's defending or not defending.
That with the previous Prime Minister, we're hearing, from Dominic LeBlanc that Prime Minister Carney has scheduled phone calls coming up. His last phone call wasn't returned. So time will tell, but also, time is ticking. We're past that artificial deadline of August 1st that was set. Now it really has to be a full court press, but I would suggest a more quiet and tempered approach behind the scenes, the type of work that I think Dominic LeBlanc is doing.
Yeah, Dominic LeBlanc won't be able to do anything because he will be restricted to whatever Carney wants. Not to mention, he's a well-greased politician. Like, Dominic LeBlanc is a greaseball. He's been serving Justin Trudeau for years. Now he'll serve Mark Carney just the same. He'll do and say whatever his master tells him to do. And the comments here are pretty funny. They're taking shots at this guy. It says a former conservative cabinet minister who's rumored to be eyeing Poilievre's job. This guy's just a partisan tool trying to boost himself up. Peter MacKay, the guy who cannot beat Pierre Poilievre for leadership of the Reform Party. Next.
Yeah, Prime Minister Mark Carney also in BC earlier today announcing support for another industry that has been hit hard by tariffs. So what does that say to you about the way Canada sees the negotiation?
Yeah, huge new supports for the softwood lumber industry, and that is something that has been targeted. It's been a long-standing irritant in the Canada-U.S. relationship, but again, the Trump administration sort of ratcheting up the tension there with larger countervailing duties and sort of a review of the entire process that could lead to even more problems for the Canadian softwood lumber industry. But
that industry has been hammered for a long time. It was Joe Biden who really jacked those up, and Justin Trudeau did nothing. He rolled over and allowed it to happen. Just 1 week Liberal loser after another. At some point, this country has to learn that the Liberals are great at politics. They're terrible at governing the country. They are greedy, they're swindling, they're self-serving losers who don't care about Canadian lives. They only care about their own bank accounts. Canadians will figure this out one way or the other. The problem is we might lose all our civil liberties by the time this happens.
If we sort of take a step back and look at what's going on here, this is sort of another major announcement by the Prime Minister to offer support. And it suggests that the Canadian government is positioning itself to be able to weather a storm. You don't make an announcement like this if you think that these problems are going to go away. It appears to be something that is really going to be here for the long haul. At least that's the perspective from right now. No country that has negotiated with the United States has been able to get out of any sort of tariff regime. Some tariffs have been lowered.
That sounds all flowery and nice, but we've got 35% on our stuff. Meanwhile, you've got countries in Africa that no one really talks about all that much getting 10 or 15% tariffs. Mark Carney did a bad job. Just say it. Just say it once on this network. He did a bad job. He betrayed Canadians. He lied to Canadians. Just say it.
You've seen the UK, the EU, Japan get negotiated deals. You have to put a big sort of asterisk beside it, though. What we know about these agreements, they're a framework for a deal. They haven't necessarily sort of been, all of the nitty-gritty has been worked out. It's very different from what a traditional trade deal would be. Normally, trade deals are these thick volumes of documents and every little detail is worked out to certain types of products and different kinds of tariffs and all these kinds of different things and qualifications, rules of origin. That's not what's going on here. It's a very different agenda as Donald Trump tries to reshape global trading relationships.
So CBC doing their best here to try to help out Mark Carney. Sadly, they'll never say it. He did a bad job. He didn't get a deal. He betrayed Canadians.